The one thing you have full control over is what you put on the end of your fork. And what you put on the end of the fork is the most powerful thing you can do for your health.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Think Your Way to an Epic Life. And today is going to be more fun for me than it is for you, I think, because we have a plant-based she's got three different major passions, but plant-based eating is one of her big passions. And I don't know how many of you know this, but I have been a vegan since October of 2014. So I'm sure I will walk away with some tips, and hopefully you'll walk away inspired to maybe open your mind to it just a little bit, just a little tiny bit. Open your mind, and we'll see what happens. So Julieanna, thank you so much for coming and joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you. So talk to me a little bit about your, how did you end up becoming plant-based?
Oh, well, it was a long journey. I started reading about nutrition and fitness and health when I was a child. And I finally stumbled upon a book when I was a teenager called Diet for a New America by John Robbins. And it was the first book that was published that connected diet with the environment and animals and health. And it blew my mind because I didn't have any idea of how food ended up on the plate, and it inspired me to make a shift. And I started that shift early, but it took me decades to really understand what I was doing and how to do it. And, when I first started, I was just eliminating animal products off my plate, and my parents were worried. And so they had this intervention, I like to say, with our friend, a family friend who's a nurse. And she proceeded to tell me over a steak that they ordered me that I will be deficient in protein and B12, blah, blah, blah. And so scared me properly as a 16-year-old girl back to eating the standard diet. But I knew there was more to the story because I did see the vegetarians dying off like flies. So I kept reading and studying. And then after I went to graduate school, became a dietitian, got my master's in nutrition, and I was able to dive into the literature directly and find out that, hey, you can get your iron better source from plants. You can get plenty of protein from plants. All of my questions were answered. And then I couldn't stop talking about it after that.
Oh, that is super cool. So I want you to talk. I mean, just talk, because people do have the false notion. I haven't had meat in over 30 years. They have the false notion that you are going to wither up and blow away and die. So what are some of the ways that you get the protein that you need?
Right. I think protein is a problem. I call it the P word because people are in a persistent pursuit of protein. It's become this, magical idea, and it's like the be all end all of health. And really, it's just one of the three macronutrients that we're required in our diet, but it's very easy to come by. And where do we get protein? Well, basically, we're getting them from a series of amino acids. Protein is basically broken down into its counterparts as little pieces of amino acids. And all of the amino acids are found in plants. All plants have all the amino acids. So basically, animals concentrate those amino acids, and we're getting a direct source, but we don't need to get a direct source. And the research shows that it's actually optimal to get your, most of your diet coming from plants, at least most of your diet, and just to minimize at least animal products, especially things like meat and, dairy, stuff like that. Those are like the real, they have a lot of impact on chronic disease, increasing your risk for chronic disease. So if you are eating a wide variety of plants, of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, in infinite tasty combinations, you can get all of those amino acids plentifully in those foods. And of course, there are certain foods that are more concentrated in more of the amino acids, like legumes, which are beans, peas, lentils. Hummus should be a food group. Soy foods like tofu and tempeh. Nuts and seeds also have a higher concentration of amino acids. But basically, you just need to get all the amino acids. You don't need to have a concentrated source of protein all the time. And just because you have more protein doesn't mean you're going to have more muscle necessarily. It doesn't mean you're going to save the world. People have this halo over protein, and it's just one of the macronutrients, and you can get plenty of it eating a whole food plant-based diet.
Well, you've also written 9 different books, which is amazing. And I personally have had, and it was, I don't want to go into details because I don't want to throw any major hospital under the bus or anything. But this was a very well-known hospital, and I had a doctor look at me straight in the eyes, and I said, "What about my diet?" And she said, "Oh, honey, don't you worry about that. Your body is so amazing that whatever you put into it, it will turn it into what your body needs." What do you have to say about that?
Well, unfortunately, that's way too common. Very, very, very common. It happens every single day. My father was like near death with a stroke, and the doctor said the same thing. Just avoid coffee and you'll be fine, which is not even at all true. And if you look at the literature, diet is the number one cause of early death and disability in the world. First in the United States, but now it's around the world. So food is literally medicine, or it can be poison. And it does matter. It does matter a lot. Now, okay, certain people get a little lucky. They have really good genetics and they're hardier and they can handle things. But we're also very equipped at handling a lot more when we're younger, because Mother Nature needs us to reproduce. Like, we're here to reproduce and perpetuate the species. But after Mother Nature is done with us, 40, 45, 50, when we're done having babies and raising them to their prime, that's when the stuff starts to happen. That's when the effects of years and years of eating a standard Western diet, or just eating lots of processed foods, lots of animal products, will start to catch up. And that's when we start getting those diagnoses. That's when the hypertension and the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol and the high blood sugars kick in. That's when diabetes starts to become more prevalent. So you do have some leeway when you're younger, but the better you eat, the earlier you start, the better. And honestly, I've worked with people literally across the lifespan. I work with pregnancy and infants, and I work with geriatric people, and I work with, everyone in between, athletes. And it's across the lifespan. When you change your diet, the impact is imminent. It happens right away. So I've witnessed, I've worked with thousands of people over 20 years, hundreds of thousands of food journals I've looked at, and lab work, and people come to me with severe chronic disease, people that are, really advanced cardiovascular disease, really advanced type 2 diabetes, where they're really they're on lots of medications and they're not living their best life because of all those medications, the polypharmacy, just the effect of the chronic illnesses themselves. And within days, I kid you not, it is so extraordinary. Within days, we see people taper off their medication. The other day, I had a client who he was on 3 medications for his blood pressure his entire adult life. Within 1 week, he was off all 3 of them. Now, obviously, to your audience, don't try this at home, and make sure your doctor is monitoring. And I have all my clients tell their doctor that they're going to start a radical approach. It's a radical, quote unquote, radical. It's not really radical, but because they need to be so careful with medications like that. But you literally can get off medications and reverse diagnoses. And this is something I was not taught in graduate school. It was not taught in my clinical work, but I see it every day, and the research now supports it. So when I started, researching this myself 20 years ago, really, as a dietitian, and kind of, working with people, and I did it on my own body, and like looking at the research. Since then, the research has expanded and as like infinite. Every day there's a new article on how a plant-based diet helps with different organ systems, on the kidneys, on the, brain, neurological health, cognitive function. But we know it's like the most substantiated stuff in the literature shows that a plant-based diet is the only diet that's actually reversed advanced stage cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And again, with all of the symptoms that cause and lead to all of those adverse long-term sequelae, these things are really, really helped and mitigated by the use of switching diets. So those doctors out there, I have to tell you, so I speak to doctors all over the world. And what's interesting is that it's, when I first started speaking, there were a few doctors in the room, and now there's thousands of doctors in the room. So the doctors learn a certain way in med school, and they're not taught about nutrition mostly at all. And so it's no surprise that in their armamentarium is medication, surgical. They know what they're supposed to learn to use. And that's why they say things like that. But I think what's interesting is that many of these doctors, I think the reason that we're increasing with the population of doctors that are utilizing nutrition, or at least embracing the idea that nutrition is that powerful, comes from the patients. So they have patients that are really sick, and they give them their medications, and the patients come home, do their homework, change their diet, and come back to the doctor and go, look at my labs. And then the doctor's like, what did you do? And how do I do it? And I think that has evolved the conversation for a lot of physicians. And I think that groundwork has been transformed, and it's slow going, but it's happening.
It is slow, and it is happening. And there are documentaries out now like Game Changers and What the Health that you can watch for free. And I saw on your podcast that you had Rip on your podcast. That is so cool. Can you tell us a little bit about him for our audience that has no clue who he is?
Oh, sure. Rip Esselstyn is a good friend of mine. Yeah, we've gone back. We started this conversation around the same time. His father, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, was kind of renowned for reversing advanced atherosclerosis and people that were on their deathbeds. He actually healed them. There's a great documentary called Forks Over Knives that shows all of his work and a lot of other amazing people that have kind of pioneered in this field. But Rip is, he was a firefighter and he brought that information to his firehouse. And it's a great story that's also highlighted in Forks Over Knives. Great guy. He does Plant Strong now, and he's inspired tons of people because I think the best, I had him on my TV show. We talked about like real men eat plants is this idea that man need to, they need to eat meat, and to be a manly man, you need to have meat. And he debunks that, with like, no, real men eat plants. And that's kind of his thing that he says. And it's really cool and it's very inspiring. And you don't need meat to have muscle. You don't need meat to be strong by any means. There's lots of people across the athletic spectrum and all the different varieties of sports that are very, very strong eating a plant-based diet. And that, again, more documentaries, more books, there's a podcast. And so, yes, there's a lot of people out there talking about this now. It's evolved a lot. And he's a great spokesperson for that part of the movement as well, and everything. He also talks about food in a really provocative, delicious way because he makes really delicious food.
He really does. And does he still, I don't know, I'm not into like usually buying frozen things, but doesn't he have a food line that you can buy that's all vegan?
Yes, he does. He does. I don't know exactly where. Yeah, it's on his website and everything, but yeah, there's food and all that. But the message that he relays, and me too, like in my 9 books with hundreds of recipes that I published, the food is easy. You don't, it's so easy to make and it's simple. Like we think about, oh, what does that mean? And it's not going to taste good, but like go back to what for anyone out there that's curious or plant curious at all, go back to what you know. It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, if I had to write a book in 6 weeks and I had to publish 50 recipes and I'm not taught, I don't know how to cook. Like, what are you talking about? But I taught myself that quickly because it's that easy. Go back to what you know. When I grew up, I ate bean and rice burritos. I ate pasta primavera. I ate vegetable sushi even. I had, there's so many cereal, fruit salads, soups, minestrone. There's so many foods that you ate that was plant-based, but you didn't say plant-based. So if you go back to what you know and go back to very simple staples, that's where the magic happens. And you could, if you look across the world, there's amazing cuisine with amazing flavors and textures and variety that are all based on plants. Rice is a staple in Asia and potatoes are a staple, in South America. And these foods that you could just put together in delicious ways with different seasonings. You could take, I like to take a bowl of rice and beans, and you could do with just rice and beans, you could do all sorts of things that are completely different. Like you can make a curried rice and beans. You can make like a Mexican style. You just add a little guacamole and salsa. So it's like make it very simple and try starting with that. Oatmeal is plant-based. Like start with the most simple things and then you build on that. And nowadays, my goodness, since I started, nowadays there's thousands and thousands of, hundreds of thousands of recipes at your fingertips for free online and hundreds of thousands of books now that have all of these delicious recipes. So you don't even have to recreate the wheel. You can just kind of like start looking for things you like. Like let's say you love lasagna. You could plug into your browser whole food plant-based lasagna and you'll have tons of options. So start simple, look for things you know that are familiar, look for things you love because you have to love your food. Otherwise it's not sustainable. So I think if you start with the food and then start learning about the science, it's even more fun because you're like blown away by how delicious, how easy, and how versatile eating plants can be.
Right. And everyone's going to be different. Some people are total foodies. That's all I care about is the food that I'm eating, and they won't even listen. And then other people are moved by the science, like in Game Changers, the blood testing that they did before feeding them a plant-based meal, and then it was shocking, stunning. I can't imagine anyone watching those documentaries and not at least having a little bit more curiosity.
Yes, people come to it for a lot of different reasons, but what's really compelling is the health benefits, and especially for someone, I'm a scientist, I'm in a healthcare world, and so that was really compelling to me. But for me, when I first read about it when I was 16 years old, I didn't know about that. You feel invincible when you're younger. So for me, it was about the animals and the environment. But then that was like just my foundation. But then I started, and then once I learned about the health benefits, it was like a win-win-win across the board. And again, for anyone listening, you don't have to be vegan. You don't have to be, I don't ever preach that at all. I think it's wonderful if you want to exclude all animal products, but really the goal is to eat fewer animal products, eat wholest foods, avoid the processed foods. And it's about what you do overall. It doesn't have to be, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a perfect diet. It doesn't even exist. Like you couldn't even create a perfect diet because there's no way to do that. But you want to emphasize the foods that are going to give you the most nutrition. So I have a mnemonic that I use that you can find on my website, plantbaseddietitian.com. It's called 6 Daily Threes. And it's the foods to prioritize so that you're getting all of your nutrition, a nice array of the nutrients in a good way. It's like to prioritize those foods, and then you could do whatever else you want on the side. And if you just start with that, it's really simple. And I'm happy to go into those 6 food groups that have all of these nutrients if you're interested.
Absolutely interested, please.
Okay, great. So definitely, we all know no one could argue that eating more fruits and vegetables is the number one best thing you could do for your health. All the science supports that, incredibly so, reducing mortality, reducing your incidence of chronic disease. So more fruits and vegetables. And the going number now is aim for 7 to 10 servings a day. So in my 6 daily threes, I kind of broke it down even more. So the leafy green and cruciferous vegetables, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, all the cruciferous, bok choy, cabbage, even cabbage, lettuce is really good. Those things are so extraordinary, and you get the most nutritional bang for your caloric buck because very low calorie, very high nutrition, and lots of versatility. So that's a whole category of vegetables and foods that you should try to prioritize every day. So when I say 6 daily threes, it's like these are 6 food groups. Try to aim for 3 servings a day of each. So the leafy green and cruciferous, so 1 serving is 1 cup raw or half a cup cooked. Very easy to get 7 to 10 servings a day of all of these things. Then I have another category for the other colored vegetables, the reds, the oranges, and the yellows, because those offer a whole other array of phytonutrients like carotenoids that are really healthy for immune system and eye health and diabetic, and they're cancer, reducing your risk for cancer and certain other things. So there's all these different nutrients that come packaged in the fruits and vegetables that offer a plethora of benefits in and of themselves. So then the other category is fruits. And then legumes. So that's what I was talking about before, the beans, the lentils, the peas, the hummus, the soy foods. You want to have 3 servings of those a day as well. And then mushrooms. I added mushrooms recently because they are so health promoting and they're so immune enhancing. So the goal is to get about 3 species of mushrooms in a week, which is really not that hard to do. And then the last one is nuts and seeds. So 1 to 2 ounces of nuts and seeds have incredible cardiometabolic benefits, have weight management benefits. They offer some unique nutrients that you can't really get elsewhere, like L-arginine, vitamin E. It's just concentrated in some wonderful nutrients. So you want to try to get 1 to 2 ounces, which is really not that much. It's about a tablespoon is 1 ounce of seeds and then a 1/4 cup of nuts. So you want to aim for 1 to 2 ounces a day of nuts and seeds. So those are the 6 daily threes. And if you get those in your diet, you're going to get a nice complement of nutrients that you need for optimal health.
Okay, that sounds very doable. So of all the books that you've written, which one, I know it's like saying which baby of yours is your favorite, but which one do you think would be the best one for people that have never done anything like this to start with?
I would suggest the Plant-Based Nutrition Idiots Guides, that series of Idiots Guides. So I wrote the first one, and I think it was 2011 it published, and then we did a second edition. I brought in a co-author, and we kind of like updated it more recently, I think 2019. But it's basically like the beginner's guide. It talks about everything for across the lifespan and athletes and why and the benefits and how and all the nutrients. So I would say that would be a good place to start, and recipes too.
Okay. There's a comedian that talked about the books for dummies and the books for idiots, and he said, "I don't know which one I am. Am I an idiot or am I a dummy?"
Some people get offended. I'm like, I didn't invent the series. It's like just makes it simple. It's like, how do you take deep science and make it super simple for anyone to read and absorb really easily? And that's what I love about this series.
Okay, and you could find those at any bookstore or Amazon or any of that. All right. So, societally, what is it like for you to go out to eat with friends?
This has evolved so much since I started. But I'll say this, I called it in my last book, I talk about the modern day trifecta of overabundance. So we've got this brain that was evolved over thousands of years to survive. Our brain is linked. We are biochemically, physiologically adapted for survival. And that's a good thing, of course. But what happens is, so when we see calorie, like a concentrated source of calorie, our brain says eat as much of that as possible and store it for times of scarcity. However, there is no more scarcity, right? Winter doesn't come anymore. Like we are constantly bombarded. That's the second part of this trifecta, is that we are constantly bombarded by temptation. We have access to food and hyper palatable foods that are like, full of stuff that we don't need because it lights up our brain, but it's everywhere 24/7. We're getting signals on social media, on the television, on billboards, and our friends and our family. We're always eating bad foods that promote disease. And the third part of that trifecta is that eating those foods and overeating in general and overeating the unhealthy foods is normalized. Obesity has become normalized, and you can't even talk about it without people getting very upset about it. But it's a real issue, and obesity itself is linked to many chronic diseases. So it's something we need to address and not be afraid to talk about it, because we're all human, and our human body and our brain is designed to do that. We're adapted to do that and to eat more and eat enough. So it's very, very challenging to try to stay on a healthy diet, to try to stay at a healthy weight. Everything is against us in this world right now, and it's a big challenge. Even if you have the best intentions, even if you've got a diagnosis, that you're dealing with, people around you, even if they're well-intentioned, people don't know about nutrition. And so they're constantly saying, well, what about protein? And what about this? And you need to have more. And I think that's the problem. And so we're dealing with not only our biology and our psychology, but we're dealing with people, and like you just asked me, societally. And it's challenging, but it's not impossible. You just have to stand in your truth and know why you're doing what you're doing. So I think being armed with information is very helpful. Now, an interesting thing that's evolved, or I would say even devolved, which I didn't expect going into this, was suddenly there is an onslaught of these products on the market that are plant-based and restaurants that are plant-based. And sometimes those are even, just as unhealthy as some of the non-plant-based versions of those. So just because we've removed the animal products doesn't mean these foods are not unhealthy. And so now you can get cookies and candies and shakes and burgers and everything you want plant-based, but they still have the saturated fat, they still have the sugar, they still have all the oils and all those added things that we don't really want to have in our diet. So going to a restaurant, sometimes all my friends are like, oh, let's go to a plant-based restaurant. I'm like, no, I'd rather not, because sometimes it's harder to get what I really want at those restaurants. I love that it's out there. I love that these options are out there, but you really do still need to stay away from the hyper palatable things. Because for the first time it took about 10 years. And when this started evolving, I started getting clients that were coming to me that were vegan with very similar health issues as the omnivores, because they're eating, when I look at their food journals, they're eating all of these processed foods. So it's not just removing animal products, it's also removing the processed foods and going to the wholest foods possible and sticking with the staples. So societally, it is even more challenging, because even if you're now plant-based, now you have to be like, well, I don't want to eat this, vegan version of this, whatever it is. That's not going to help me get to my goal. So it's almost even more challenging. But, it's, again, lead with knowledge and learn why and what and the science behind it. And then once you have the experience viscerally, like I just hung up with a client right before we got on here, she knows that if she eats this way, she knows what happens to her body, and she feels better, and all of her symptoms go away, and, her body is at the weight she wants, and she could perform better at the gym. And it's like, she knows it because she's viscerally experienced it. So first you have to kind of take a leap of faith and try it. And then once you see what it could do to your body, and, get your labs drawn before and after, get on the scale before and after, like do a real check in an objective scientific way to see what can happen when you eat this way. And then you have that visceral experience of what it does to your body, and you see it. And so then you don't need, it's easier to resist what everyone else is saying out there when you know what's true for you.
It's very true. So are there, that you know of, there may be something out there that you don't know of, are there any of the fake meats that are healthy or that are less unhealthy than others? Or is it all just processed, stay away from it?
No, sure. There's definitely a spectrum, and there's definitely, there's gray area, and there's some that are better than others. And you could sit there and go, well, is this better than that? The question I always say that's not asked often enough is compared to what? So if you're going to make a black bean burger at home with, some flaxseed, like a whole food burger that you make at home, which is, by the way, very easy to do, surprisingly easy to do, that's going to be healthier than one that you're going to get at a fast food restaurant, right? But if you're gonna, you could also compare that fast food restaurant. You can have a bowl of chili at home. You could have like, there's all these different. You can compare to what is a question we have to ask. There's definitely a spectrum of healthier versus less healthy. And so again, it's not about being perfect. And maybe a plant-based burger at a fast food restaurant is better than the meat-based burger at a plant-based restaurant. I mean, at a fast food restaurant. So again, you have to look at compared to what, but you really overall want to look at the majority of what you're eating. And if the majority of what you're eating are whole foods and like as close to nature as possible, you're going to have the results. And the more you do that, the more the results you'll have. The more of the junky food or the foods that are high in sugar, oil, salt, and flour and all the things that are just highly processed, the more of the health damaging effects you're going to witness in your body and feel as well. So it's a spectrum, and you need to kind of look at it from an overview and just try to make your overall diet the best. The interesting thing too is about those, it's called hyperpalatable because when you eat those foods, it lights up your brain so much and it makes you want more of them. So I like to tell everyone, you're not broken. You're not broken. It's the food that makes you want to eat those foods. But when you're eating more wholesome foods, you're satiated, you're satisfied, you don't crave them. They taste good because you have to enjoy your food, but it doesn't light up your brain in the same way. So sticking to those wholer foods as much as possible over the long run is going to bring the most results.
There's a really good book called Whole, and it talked about how science is trying to take the vitamin C out of the orange when in reality, the other things that are in the orange make the vitamin C work. So eat the orange, don't take the pill.
Yes, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, absolute amazing man. And yes, amazing colleague. And he's written a bunch of books, and that was one of my favorites because he talks about like the isolated concentrated nutrients aren't the same. And we know that if you look at you take a multivitamin and it doesn't improve your health span, it doesn't do anything for you. So it's eating it with the synergy of all the other compounds and how things help, absorb, and how your body recognizes an orange, but it doesn't necessarily recognize a concentrated, isolated source of vitamin C. And our bodies respond very differently to an entire food that has all those synergistic compounds, this complement, this cascade of different events that take place when you consume it and have to extract it and digest it yourself versus taking something that's concentrated in a pill form. So it's really interesting to think about that. And that's where you see these amazing, like almost magical results happen when you're eating these just regular nature foods that came out of the ground and every version of it, when you're not refining it and processing it, your body knows what to do with it and it will respond.
Okay, so what tips or tricks do you have for someone who is listening and they kind of sort of want to check it out? However, they've been programmed so long in the other way that they can't imagine it?
Great question. So again, keep it simple. First, do some research, read about it. Or watch a documentary or something like that, but do it simply. Find foods you know and love, like stuff that's familiar, that you already know is familiar and enjoyable and convenient, and start there. Have some oatmeal instead of bacon and eggs for breakfast. And then for lunch, maybe incorporate more vegetables. You can start small. And I encourage people to start small and simple because that's when you can start expanding and noticing the difference. You could dive all in, try a whole meatless day, the Meatless Monday campaign where you're doing all plant-based. But again, be careful of the processed foods because that's not going to get you what you want. You're not going to get those results that we're talking about here. So start simple, explore, have fun, make this positive and fun and adventure rather than I'm cutting out, 5 ingredients. No, it's like, I'm going to try things that I've never tried before. Like I've never tried, caviar lentils, or I've never tried wild rice or I don't know, a mango or something you've never really experimented with. Try things that are new and have fun with it. Because if you try one thing and then you could try a new recipe, go online, look at all these amazing recipes that are out there that are delicious, that again, sound familiar to you. So if you are in the mood, you're having this craving for, I don't know, a tostada, go on there and find, how do I make a whole food plant-based tostada? You'll find so many options with recognizable ingredients, and then find those ingredients and start with one recipe. Because when I first started, started and before there were all the books and before the internet, I would try something at home. And if I loved it, I would write out a recipe. And if I loved it, I would put it in a pile with a heart on it. If my kids loved it, it was a bonus, and then I started a pile. It's like I started collecting recipes that I love and the ones that my family loved. And soon enough, I had a pile of recipes that we all loved. And it was like, you don't need that many. The other thing I like to remind people is that we are such creatures of habit. Most of us cycle between maybe 1 or 2 breakfasts, maybe 3 or 4 lunches, maybe 5 or 6 dinners in a week. So you really only need to find 8 to 10 of your new favorite recipes that are based on plants. And that's all. And you cycle between them. So keep it simple and have fun. Make this fun.
Have fun. I love it. So I have a friend who is a naturopath, and she was on the podcast. And she told me long before she was on the podcast, she said, I know that if MDs were to get one of these diseases, that they wouldn't go through the same protocol that they put on their patients, that they would come to me. She just always knew that. And it wasn't until the podcast went out that that actually happened for her. And 5 different MDs are now her patients. So instead of waiting until you get yourself in trouble, just start, right? Keep it simple. Just start.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always say everyone could do a little better, right? I want to do better. We all want to do better. If you want to improve anything, start with your food. It's the one thing in this world we can control. You can't control everything else. Everything else, stuff happens, life happens, the environment, things happen, pandemics happen. The one thing you have full control over is what you put on the end of your fork. And what you put on the end of the fork is the most powerful thing you can do for your health.
Well, it totally makes sense. If you have a Lamborghini, you're not going to put the junk gas into it. You're going to put the very, very best you can. And this machine is run by what we put on the end of our fork. I love the way you put that. Any wonderful last words of advice for our folks?
Have fun, stay simple. You're not broken. The food system is broken. The world around us is really broken. And that's why it's conducive to all of this chronic disease that we're seeing escalating and escalating and escalating, and obesity, all of these things that keep climbing, but they don't have to. Food is that powerful. Try it, see what it feels like, try it on for size, have fun, and stay delicious. That's really important, that you love your food. Make it fun.
I love it. Thank you so much, Julieanna. We appreciate your time immensely.
Thank you so much. It's great to meet you.